6. His opinion of farming. Wallace gives Jack Dobell his opinion of farming. Uncle Josh, the Jews, a sensible people. Wallace makes his arrangements for a crop. He and Kichai try plowing, both disgusted. Queer dusk melon, ruined by the drought. How Wallace was cheated out of his roasting years. Living on watermelons and Bordeaux. Wallace's future prospects and conclusion. Some years ago, while on my way to the city of San Antonio, I lost my road, and after wandering about the prairies till near the sunset, I concluded to strike camp and make a fresh start in the morning. But just as I had made up my mind to pass the night in sprawls and put up as well as I could with such accommodations as are usually furnished by the extensive establishment, I thought I would faint symptoms of settlement ahead of me. Spurring on my jaded horse, I at length came to a sort of hybrid between log cabin and half-faced camp, in front of which a man was seated on a fallen tree, busily engaging and rubbing up his rifle. "Can you give me such directions, my friend," said I, "as will enable me to find my way back to the main road to San Antonio?" The man looked up as he replied to my question, and to my astonishment, I recognized my old friend and messmate, Big-Foot Wallace. "Why, hello, Foot," said I. "Have you forgotten your old compadre, Jack Dobell?" Big-Foot looked at me dubiously for a minute. Then, springing up from the log, he seized me by the hand and gave it such a grip that my fingers stuck together for 5 minutes afterwards. "Get down, Dobell," he said. "Rest your face and hands. You must stay with me all night. In the morning I will pilot you out of the road myself. That's a fact, though," continued Big-Foot, looking ruefully around at the apparently scant accommodations afforded by his ranch. "That's a fact, though. I haven't much to offer you. Crops have failed entirely, and there's pretty smart of good grass in that hollow you'll be under for your nag. And my partner, Jackson, was lucky enough to kill a fat buck today. So get down at once. I have a heap to tell you about what happened to me since we last met, and particularly about a scurvy trick my partner, Jim Jackson there," pointing to a remarkably homely individual who was busily engaging by a pair of peeling the hide of the forsaken buck, "played upon me about a month ago." Without further palaver, I dismounted my horse, and under Bigfoot's guidance proceeded to stake him out in a snug little valley where the mesquite grass grew rank and luxuriantly. "You needn't be afraid to stake him so far from camp. There's no Indians around here now," said Bigfoot with a melancholy expression of countenance, as if he was heartily sick of these piping times of peace, and longed to see once more the stirring scenes of bygone days. "I do believe there hasn't been an Indian 10 miles to this place for the past 12 months. "Why, you don't tell me, Bigfoot," I said, "that you have been all that time without a single scrimmage with Mexicans or Indians?" "Yes," he said, "with the exception of a little tussle I had with the Tonks about 6 months ago in Llano. I haven't seen a row since I drove my megs down to the settlement. No wonder neither, for the people are piling in as thick as pig tracks around a corn crib door, and they have fenced up the prairies in such a way that the Indians won't venture in, for fear of being hemmed up. And I only knew where these people came from, I would go there right off, for there can't be one left behind, and a fellow wouldn't be scratched to death. And here he is now. Of all the things in the world, I hate being fenced up. I want plenty of elbow room, plenty of outlet. Out here you can't travel half a dozen miles in any direction without being headed off by somebody's fence." On our return to the ranch, we took a seat on the log which answered Bigfoot in place of a sofa, and he said to me, "Well, in the first place, I suppose you would like to know how I came to settle here and take up with business of farming. See, after the Mexican War had ended, and that chap with the gold epaulets on his shoulders and the chicken fixings on his coat sleeves had mustered us out of service and paid us off, Jackson and I concluded, as we had saved up a smart pile of money between us, that we would try our hands at ranching. Neither of us knew anything about it, but we thought it would be plain sailing enough, as things appeared to grow in this country pretty much out of their own accord anyhow, overly requiring a great deal of hard work, and neither of us were overly fond. So we bought 200 acres of land here from Uncle Josh, and by the same token, he made us pay a swagger price for it, 25 cents an acre, half cash down. You know Uncle Josh, don't you? There never was a better-hearted fellow in the world, and he has one little failing. Whenever he can get somewhere there's some liquor, either liquor gives out or he gets engine drunk. Sir, one or the other. I have taken him out of the chaparral and talked him with tears as big as glass marbles about his carrying on that way. But all I can ever get out of him is that's knowing the high price of putty, which is, he says, is half a cent on ton, and just as he laid it sold out. But as I was telling you, after Jackson and I bought this place of land from Uncle Josh, the first thing we did was to build this shanty fence, not the truck patch you see yonder. But long before we got through the job, I tell you it would take a perfect disgust for farming. To sit here comfortably on this log and to look at the little shanty and the truck patch alongside it, you would think them a mere circumstance, and in fact, they don't make a very imposing show in the way of improvements. But just you try your hand at riving a few hundred boards out of those knotty post oaks, and split them just as well crossways as lengthways. And if you don't leather a few and cut a few more, then I'm mistaken. And if that doesn't satisfy you, just pitch into that chaparral over yonder, where the thorns are as sharp as a crooked cat's claws, and perhaps by the time you're tattooed all over like a New Zealander, there's nothing left of your pants but the waistband, and only the collar of your shirts. You will come out to the same conclusion I have. Farming ain't quite the pleasant of business as following an Indian trail on an easy-going horse, with a fair prospect of overtaking the women and children. In my opinion, Jews are most sensible about the farming, after all. You can find them everywhere, making money of all sorts and trades and occupations. But who ever heard of Jews that followed the grubbing in the ground for a living? Even in the time of Moses, they went scouting around the country for 40 years, living on manna and grasshoppers, just for an excuse to keep from building shanties and hoeing corn. They are shrewd, smart people, and I'd join them once, only I'm opposed to their earmarks, and I don't like being circumcised and hammed up, as I told you. Besides, I won't give it out in old Ned, of which I'm remarkably fond. Take my advice, Dobell, and never do try a farming unless you have half a dozen darkies and a small trash gang to clear away the roughness. Well, as I was saying, after we'd worked and fussed around here for more than a month, I got the shanty built and the ground fenced. Went to the town and bought a plow, shovel, spades, hoes, and all sorts of farming ammunition, and to have everything ready when the planting season came around. I went to a drugstore and bought all kinds of seeds done up in little brown paper parcels, for I think maybe farming is a little like shooting ducks with a mixed shot. If a number 4 don't hit him in the body, perhaps a number 7 will take him in the head. If parsnips don't do it, maybe beets will. I didn't forget muskmelons, watermelons, for I'm powerfully fond of them. And, well, as I didn't, I'll tell you before I'm done. The first thing I did when I got back from town was to hitch my old saddle horse, old Kitchite, into the plow. And if I ever saw a shame-faced brute, he was one. He looked as though he had got down in the lowest notch at last. He was so cowed he went off and quiet on lamp, never cut up the first shine. I had never tried plowing before in my life, but I'd seen other people do it, and I thought it was the easiest thing in the world. But I'm blamed if I got the hang of it rightly to the day. Sometimes the crazy thing would scoot along the top of the ground for a yard or so, and then croup, it would come up against the grub and jar the very nails of my fingers. Then again, it would die right down to the earth as if I had thought it was engaged in digging cellars while the job. And whenever I tried to bring it up, I was sure to overdo the thing, and it would go again scooting along the top of the ground until another grub would bring it up unsteady. I pledge you my word, Dobell. After the first run of the furrow, I looked back and it made me dizzy. It was monstrous crooked. However, we at last got through with the job, though if you ever seen the field after we had done it, you would have thought a gang of wild hogs had been rooting in it for the last month. Well, we planted most of it in corn. The rest we planted the seeds I had bought at the drugstore. Among them, paper labeled muskmelon seed, which I'm remarkably fond of muskmelons, I am. So I planted them in the richest part of the patch, and tended them well till they finally. One day, as I was passing through the patch, I saw a young melon sprouting on one of the vines, and as I appeared rather queer look, I stooped down to examine it closely, as I may never scalp an Indian again if it wasn't a regular old bottle gourd. I turned in right away and dug up all the vines, for fear strangers might think I had a tough nigger blood in me. For, you know the old saying, a poor man for posterior, nigger for gourds. Well, everything grew off splendidly for a spell, and the corn seemed to do as well as crooked furrows as if they'd been straight. But after a while, the drought set in, and the drier it got, the more the corn turned yellow, till at last it wilted right up. I tried my best to make it rain, but it was all no use. Sometimes the frogs broke powerfully in the slash over yonder, but it never rained for all that. And at last the slash went dry, and the frogs would have died if it hadn't been turned to highland toads. Sometimes the wind was due east, and my corns hurt me terribly, and still it didn't rain. Sometimes there was a great hello from the moon, as big as a wagon wheel, and I made sure we would have rain then. But we didn't, and never did I anything I saw as dry as the long yarn I'm spilling now. But to cut it short, the crop turned out to be a perfect failure, and now I will tell you about my scurvy trick that Jackson played off me not long ago. I wish my rifles may snap the next fair chance I get an Indian, as I was such the meanness for human nature. You see, though it was true crop had failed teetotally, there was about roasting ears enough in the pitch to make one pretty fair mess, and I told Jackson one morning that I would go out and kill a fat buck, and when we got back we would gather the crop, and have one good bait out of it anyhow. So I scabs up old Hawkins, as I call my rifle, and I put it off up the dough run, and down the other, then over York's Creek, and from there the Little Sandy. Not a single deer could I find. At last, however, when I had given up all hopes of killing deer that day, I was making tracks for home. Just after crossing Burning Boot, I bucked a fine buck as you'd ever see. I peeled his hide off in short order, cut out the saddle, and started home double quick. For by this time I was getting hungry as a coyote wolf. When I had got in about 200 yards from camp, I smelt fried corn, and I mistrusted something was immediately wrong. And sure enough, when I walked to the ranch, here sat old rascal Jackson shoveling the last grain from the skillet down his throat. He had taken advantage of my absence to gather and eat up the whole crop we had been working 4 or 5 months to make. He hadn't left a nubbin as big as my thumb in the field, and consequently, all my share of the crop was in one smell of fried corn. I suppose I shouldn't have got that much if I hadn't happened to have a wind of Jackson as I came up. Well, from this time on, things got worse and worse. The potatoes took the dry rot, and who could blame them as a drop of rain hadn't fallen in 3 months, and everything else we had planted wilted right up, except the watermelons. They did finely, I suppose because they carry their own water along with them, and of course are independent of the weather. By this time, what with buying plows and hoes and other implements, our money gave out entirely, and we were compelled to live on watermelons, and now and then a dish of poor dough, which, as you know, is a much stronger diet than watermelons. I admit that watermelons are first-rate in their way, but when a fellow has nothing but watermelons for breakfast, watermelons for dinner, watermelons for supper, he fairly hates the sight of one for a while. I pledge my word, Dobell, after that I lived for a week or so on him. I could hear the water jug in me whenever I stubbed my toe as I walked along. And then there were such unsatisfying and inconvenient diets. In 15 minutes I was eating, that would weigh 20 pounds, and I was just as hungry as ever. Once there came along some travelers here who wanted dinner, and I tell you, Dobell, I have never felt so mean in my life as the time Paul Jenkins said, "No sirree, Horsefly Bob," to a question I asked her. And as I did, I took the travelers out to the patch and given them butcher knife apiece and told them to pitch in, as their dinner was before them. However, I see Jackson has got the steaks ready for supper, and I drop a chunk. Dobell, and take a bite. Now, Dobell, he continued, as he helped a tin platter, about a pound of juicy steak, I'd rather be that old chunk you're sitting on, sailing forever round as a dead 80, and live here as I've done the last 6 months. Well, Bigfoot, said I, if you're going to give up farming, where will you go at? There won't be any more rangers wanted, because the government has settled all the Indians upon their reserves, where they are learning to farm and eat fat beef in place of horse meat. Yes, said Bigfoot, with a melancholy shake of the head. Oh, that is very true. I know, and I hear Indians take to it kindly. Leastways, the beef. However, Jackson tells me there's a couple of gals moved into the settlement down here that are as rich as cow yards, and we have concluded to sleek up a bit and hunt stock a while in that neighborhood. I think I shall stand a pretty good chance with one of them. Jackson here, he is so uncommonly ugly. If that gal was dying of some sort of sickness that could only be cured by marrying, I'm doubtful if he has to offer himself. If she would rather kick the bucket, him too. Well, look at them teeth, how they stick out in front, just as if they'd been made out on purpose to eat pumpkins through a fence. Bigfoot, I said, if you should accidentally fall on the gal's speculation, what will you do then? That is what I call a poser, he said. But there's one thing you may depend on. Just as soon as I hear of a Comanche starving to death for want of horse seeds, I'll try farming again, but not before. Jackson, bring out that bottle board. There's a little wake robin left in it, and I've talked till I'm as dry as a buffalo chip.